Shadow Moon, while being in prison, is counting the days until his release. He calls his lovely wife because he's tormented by vague premonitions, and she assures him that she's waiting for him. And his best friend Robbie helps him organize a party to celebrate his return. But 2 days before his release, the warden tells the man that his wife was killed in a car accident, so he's released 2 days early. The man arrives at the airport, but his tickets are pre-booked for him, and it costs a lot more to change them today. At first, Shadow is ready to get angry, but he remembers his prison mate, who told him about a similar situation when the released man had a riot at the airport and ended up behind bars again. He agrees to exchange his ticket for tomorrow's flight and makes himself comfortable on the chairs in the waiting room because he is short on money. The next day, he notices an elderly man on boarding who is not acting very adequately. And on the plane, he finds himself sitting next to him. And it turns out that the man was just pretending to get into first class. The neighbor asks to be called Wednesday and offers him a job. Shadow refuses as he hopes to get a job at his friend Robbie's gym. But Wednesday confidently declares that he has no job and no job in sight except for the one he offers. But Shadow actively dislikes the brash and impudent old man, and he refuses. Wednesday falls asleep, Shadow follows suit and sees a dried up forest in his sleep, from which a bison emerges with glowing eyes. He is awakened by a stewardess, and it turns out that he's the last passenger left in the cabin. Due to bad weather, the plane lands in a nearby town, and Shadow takes a car to get home. But on the way, he stops at the bar, where he meets Wednesday again, who informs him that his best friend Robbie was killed in the same car accident as his wife. Frustrated, Shadow agrees to a game of hide-and-seek with Wednesday, who assures him that if he loses, he will take a job with him. Shadow flips a coin, which is intercepted by a man who calls himself a leprechaun. Crazy Sweeney shows Shadow some tricks with the coin and forces him to fight him. Shadow refuses, but Sweeney doesn't stray far and comments on Wednesday's offer to be his bodyguard, warning that the old man is a crook. Wednesday buys Shadow a drink to seal their agreement. Shadow gives in. He agrees as long as he helps him attend his wife's funeral and will pay at least $2,000 a week. But the guy reserves the right to leave him as soon as he gets bored. Crazy Sweeney does tricks again, extracting gold coins right out of thin air. He is willing to reveal the secret if Shadow fights him, but the man again refuses, and the leprechaun speaks impolitely of his wife. At this point, Shadow gets impatient and punches the insolent man in the face. A fight ensues. Shadow wakes up in Wednesday's car and remembers everything when he sees the leprechaun's gold coin in his hand. He tidies himself up in a roadside bathroom and goes to Laura's funeral. After entering the church, he is seated with Robbie's wife, who informs him that Shadow's wife and her husband were not just together in the car, but were having an affair. After the funeral, Shadow is alone at his wife's grave. He expresses everything he thinks about her behavior and tells her how he has been reading one book a day for all 3 years to become worthy of her, and tosses a coin on her grave. Unbeknownst to him, it mysteriously sinks in the dirt. At this point, Robbie's wife finds him. Intoxicated by the drugs, the woman offers him revenge on the cheaters right on their graves. But the man brings her to her senses and heads home. But on the side of the road, he suddenly sees a strange object. He puts it on his face like a mask, and the man finds himself in a virtual technical boy car, who demands to be told about Wednesday. Shadow assures him that he knows nothing about his employer, and he orders his men to kill the man. Shadow manages to free himself from the mask, but the men continue to beat him and then try to lynch him. The news breaks, freeing Shadow, while the men who hanged him are killed by an unknown assailant. Beaten, Shadow comes to Wednesday with questions about the attack by Technical Boy, but he convinces him to keep working for him again. The couple goes to Chicago and goes to an apartment owned by 3 sisters and a slaughterhouse worker named Chernobog, who furiously attacks Wednesday, ordering him to get out. But Wednesday manages to get his old pal to talk after dinner because he needs Chernobog to go with them for some reason. In the evening, Chernobog plays checkers with Shadow on a bet. If Shadow wins, Chernobog goes with them, but if Shadow loses, Chernobog kills him at dawn with his cattle hammer. Shadow loses. He goes to sleep and suddenly he hears footsteps. He follows the man and makes his way to the roof. It turns out to be the youngest of the sisters, Zorya Vechernaya. She asks the man to kiss her and gives him the moon from the sky in the form of a silver dollar. Shadow wakes up in his bed, for it was all a dream, calls Chernobog to play checkers again, and this time he wins, forcing Chernobog to agree to go with them when needed. The couple drives on. One day they start talking about Jesus, and Wednesday tells them that he is not just one man, but is represented by thousands of people of different nationalities. For example, the Mexican Jesus came to America illegally. Later, they meet Crazy Sweeney at a cafe, who demands that Shadow return his lucky coin given to him by mistake. The man tells him that he threw it on Laura's grave. Crazy Sweeney digs up Laura's grave, but finds that no one is in it. Shadow enters the motel room and meets Laura there. Laura climbs out of the grave, sees a bright light in the distance, walks towards it, and discovers her husband hanged. In an unexplained way, she gains strength, destroys his enemies, and cuts the rope without revealing herself. The woman returns to Robbie's house, tidies herself up as best as she can, and is constantly reminded of her husband. And then she is caught by her lover's wife. The woman screams in horror, but gradually gets used to the strangeness of the situation and tells her that Shadow knows all about the strange circumstances of her death. Then she sews Laura's arm that was torn off in the fight. Later, Laura confesses her love for her husband and realizes that she is forced to follow him. All this she tells her husband in the motel room, but Shadow cannot believe the reality of what is happening for a long time. The woman kisses him and feels her heartbeat inside, as if she remains alive. She will keep an eye on him because Shadow is involved in some very strange adventure. That's when Wednesday knocks on his door. He's ready to answer questions, but then police cars show up at the motel and arrest the couple for Wednesday's bank robbery. Meanwhile, Sweeney finds Laura and tries to get his coin back, but discovers that the coin is inside her and it gives her life. Leprechaun admits that he was hired by Wednesday to fight and asks that he not be trusted. In prison, Shadow tries to find out who his employer really is and who he is so afraid of that he is forced to flee. But the new gods of our time show up. Technical Boy apologizes to Shadow for trying to kill him, and Mr. World offers Wednesday an alliance, promising to help him gain an audience by sending a missile called Odin to attack North Korea, thus making his name super famous in the world. They kill the cops and let Shadow and Wednesday escape. Shadow questions what he saw at the police station and confesses to Wednesday that Laura has come back to life. They return to the motel, but Laura is not in her room. Wednesday recalls the stalking, and the pair leave without noticing Laura, who is found again by Sweeney. He intends to help resurrect her so that she can return his lucky coin. And Jesus can help with that. The pair sets out on the road. At this time, Shadow begins to be bothered by the wound he received, and Wednesday heals his mercenary, bringing the man to a complete amazement. He later takes him to his old friend, Vulcan, who maintains control of the small town through the residents' belief in the right to bear arms. Vulcan agrees to side with Wednesday and forges him a sword, but he later betrays them by telling the new gods of their whereabouts. In retaliation, Wednesday kills him with his shackled sword and curses his followers by urinating into the vat of boiling metal where Vulcan's body had fallen. Meanwhile, Sweeney and Laura are driving on the trail of Wednesday and Shadow, and the Leprechaun confesses that he is taking part in Wednesday's war to atone for the desertion he committed when he was a soldier. At this point, Laura sees a rabbit under the wheels. She turns the wheel, the truck overturns, and Sweeney's lucky coin falls out of her body. The Leprechaun looks at the woman's dead body and recalls a past accident to which he was directly involved. Afterwards, he returns the coin to Laura instead of taking it back. Meanwhile, Wednesday and Shadow arrive at the tailor's to order costumes. Shadow is seething with anger. He doesn't understand what is happening to him, why Wednesday killed his friend, and how Laura could rise from the dead. He dreams of a mountain of human skulls, on which he once again encounters a bison with glowing eyes. But instead of giving him answers, Wednesday takes him to his old acquaintance. Upon entering the house, Shadow is struck by the beauty and harmony inside, while Wednesday reminds him that today is the Easter holiday. Shadow looks at the strange guests inside, then sees the lady of the house, Easter, and immediately falls under her spell. At this point, he is greeted by a man with a halo over his head, who assures him that Shadow knows him. And Wednesday reminds him to believe is to see. And Shadow looks around again and realizes that the old gods are all around him. And the man with the halo is one of Jesus, for every religion and denomination has its own Christ. Easter meets Shadow, who makes a pleasant impression on her. Wednesday comes to ask for her support in the coming war, but the goddess has no intention of getting involved in the battle. To which Wednesday reminds them of the oblivion of the old gods by men. And it was Jesus who did this, who diverted all the attention of the people to himself. Jesus, who has heard all this, feels uncomfortable, and Easter takes Wednesday inside, accusing him of disrespecting Jesus. But the latter insists that she is superior to any god, and adds that the new gods have killed Vulcan. So his side needs the goddess of spring to show them what they can do, and she will be prayed to again. Meanwhile, Laura and Sweeney come for Shadow at Easter Manor, while Shadow finds Jesus sitting on the surface of the water in the pool. He asks questions that worry him. How do I begin to believe? And Christ suggests believing in the senses to begin with. Wednesday, meanwhile, persuades Easter to make people remember her and start praying to her, while she feels the presence of a dead woman in the house. Sweeney asks for her help in resurrecting Laura. The goddess examines her and discovers that the woman cannot be resurrected because she was killed by a god. Laura forces Sweeney to confess that Wednesday orchestrated both Laura's death and Shadow's imprisonment to bring Shadow into the fold. At this time, the new gods arrive at the house of Easter, who says that she has no intention of helping Wednesday. She is threatened, however. That's when Wednesday steps forward. The old gods inspired people to accomplish things, but the new ones give a pretty picture instead of conviction. Mr. World reminds them that the new gods have all the powers of progress against the knives of the old masters. And then Wednesday uses lightning to destroy the servants of the new gods, proclaims himself Odin, and convinces Easter to use his powers and take away the spring by causing a drought. Easter steps forward, raises her hands, and the green planet goes dark and the sprouts go into the ground. Mr. World proclaims the beginning of war. After seeing what has happened, Shadow finally recognizes faith in the gods. This series is an adaptation of the cult science fiction novel by Neil Gaiman, in which the author raises a rather controversial topic. The old gods demanded a lot from people, but the new ones are aiming at something seemingly unimportant, human time. So the story of the protagonist is an attempt to figure out what values humanity follows today. And I have to admit, it's pretty exciting.